Okay, welcome to the final session in the project management module. In this session, I'm really going to be talking about, wrapping up the project. So, essentially, what I've talked about in the first section of the module is project planning and all the things that go together with project planning. I've kind of touched on project delivery, but really talking around some of the broader social and relationship type issues around that, and I've talked about risk obviously as a concept and as an issue in projects. But really, in terms of delivery projects, well, that's all very dependent on the nature of the project itself, and there's a kind of technical side which really, from a management point of view, I'm not particularly interested in. What I'm interested in is the managerial aspects around projects. So in this section, I'm going to talk about issues around project completion, the managerial issues of project completion. So talk about completion, a bit about audit, and then pick up on some research that I've done in the past with some around learning and how that learning might be embedded within future projects. Okay, so there's a bit on chapter 14 around this topic, and I've got some of my own references which you'll find at the end of the session which I'm delivering now. Okay, so I started in the teaching session with George Bush and him standing on an aircraft carrier at the end of the Iraq War saying mission accomplished. Of course it wasn't really accomplished, and you can see there some of the issues which 10 years later, by 2013, we had all sorts of there's still a massive concern with Iraq and the US involvement in Iraq. If you regard the intervention in Iraq as a project, then the project finished, and yet there is still this residual thing going on and on and on and on, which the US just couldn't extricate itself from. So what do we mean by a finished project? It's not as straightforward and clear-cut as it may seem, as I hope this example illustrates. Okay, so let's think a bit about project completion. So what's the objective? The objective is satisfaction of stakeholders. Okay, as we saw in a previous session, stakeholders can mean a whole load of things. So it can mean the customer and the client, the end users, people involved in the project, suppliers, all sorts of people could be regarded as stakeholders, and it's their satisfaction which is important. I guess from the paying customer's point of view, it's about getting a product or a service which enables them to incorporate that into their strategic delivery of whatever they're trying to achieve as their normal day-to-day business. What are the goals from project completion? They are delivery of the product or service on time and to budget, timely release of the resources which are tied up in the project, and minimising the costs associated with closing down. So I'll pick up on one or two of those points in a moment. So, project closure. Projects don't always come to a clean, clear ending. Okay, ones which do are regarded as normal completions, but actually often projects aren't normally completed in a normal way. We have premature endings sometimes, so projects get cancelled or they come to a halt very abruptly because funding runs out or something like that, so we end up with premature endings. Often with premature endings we don't end up with delivering all the value we hope to from the project. We have perpetual projects, so the Iraq War might be an example of a perpetual project. Perhaps something more traditionally project-like. Another example would be the Eurofighter Typhoon, which went on and on and on, years and years and years late, and the project crept and crept and crept, and we have perfection creep, all sorts of things going on with the Typhoon. We also have failed projects, and often I'll get an example in a moment of a project which failed, and it took a strategic decision to stop that project. One of the examples which I've talked about in I think the very first session was Connect for IT, the NHS massive programme of projects which was about trying to link IT systems right across the country, right across the NHS. And also, here's the thing, priorities change. Projects can take months or even years to complete. And in that time, the broader strategic situation within which organisations are operating can change significantly. And if that's the case, maybe the project isn't delivering what's really currently needed or might be needed in the future. Okay, so here's an example of a failed project. This was via Control Center. I talked about it. I've got a couple of greyed out YouTube clips at the bottom there. A massive investment in something where the stakeholders were never really involved in the project. So I talked about that in the sin, and there's a bit more about it. Okay, so let's think about some of the activities involved in closing down projects. First of all, we can think about the organisation. So way back in session 2, I talked about project organisation. Here we disband the organisation, disband the team. The team gets reassigned, reports are made on performance in the project, those sort of things. We have financial closed down, so all sorts of transactions need to be closed down. We need to produce financial statements, how the project performed in terms of its planning and budget, those sort of things. We have purchasing, so we have suppliers who provided specialist services and products for the project. They need to be told that the project is closing down and that any final payments need to be cleared and made. The project site itself needs to be closed down, so the facilities need to be disbanded. Issues and follow-on actions need to be considered. So what about outstanding issues which might be involved in the project, things which might turn up later on in the project which you hadn't anticipated when the project was delivered, follow-on actions, any recommendations for follow-up projects need to be made. And some sort of post-project review needs to happen. I think arguably the most overlooked aspect of the closing down process. And of course, some sort of benefits or delivery plan has to be in place and owned. What are the benefits which come out of this project, and how are they going to be transferred to the customer and end users? Okay, so some of the issues around completion. There's a trade-off. We have a trade-off between rapid project completion, where things might get missed or things might go wrong and we don't notice that, and there might be some latent defects in what's handed over, or drawn-out project completion, where everything gets sorted out, but then the timescale stretches and stretches and stretches. So there's a trade-off between those two, and there's kind of tension between those two. Often, it depends on what the priorities are for the customer. If the customer wants projects delivered on it by a certain date, this is vital to their overall business activities, then they need to then they'll focus more on rapid project completion. But there's a risk involved in that. There's a risk involved in getting projects finished quickly and then finding mistakes were made. Often incentives are given for timely completion. That's timely as opposed to rapid or drawn out completion. So timely completion, such as frequently within contractual arrangements for suppliers and specialist subcontractors, for contract staff, and also bonuses might be awarded to organisations and to staff for increased performance or faster performance in trying to get the project done. And then there's post-project work, things that happen after the project's handed over, in order to maybe to provide manuals or to provide training, so that the product of the project can be incorporated within organisations. Often there's a load of project documentation. This provides evidence of a properly completed project. Might use ISO 9000. Frequently, litigation occurs at this point, and that's because what was delivered might not be quite what the customer expected to be delivered, so they try to resolve that. The project team move on and disperse, so the customer doesn't quite get what they wanted. The documentation is important because it provides customers with operation and maintenance information, such as built drawings, IT manuals, those sort of things, so there can be sensibly used, enables project reviews and learning, which is crucial, and enables organisations to capture knowledge from previous projects for similar future projects. Okay, so in the teaching session I gave you some examples of some artwork. So this is Goya, this is Turner, this is Kandinsky, and this is Rubens. And I asked at the time what we regard as the best. So there we are. Which is the best? Goya, Turner, Kandinsky, or Rubens? I asked that for a reason, because here's the thing. A successful project is often something which is in the eye of the beholder. So this is a nice quote which prompted my my use of those different pieces of artwork. Trying to pin down what success means in the project context is akin to gaining consensus from a group of people on the definition of good art. Everyone will have different views on what they mean by success and failure. So what do we mean by success? It depends on who you are. Are you the end user, consumer, final customer? Are you the person paying the bills, normally the client, customer or sponsor? Are you a member of the project team? They'll have an interest in what they mean by success of a project as well. Have we made a profit? Have I been successful in my own terms? Has my bit of activity in the project been successful? And then we have suppliers and or participating departments who are involved in the project. And then what is the nature of success? Is it project delivery? Often that becomes a focus, and if you see reports about project success and failure in the press and in documentation, this is often around whether it was delivered on budget and on time and met the quality requirements which were set out in the specification, which was set out in the first place. In other words, time, cost, quality. Or is it more of a strategic issue? Really, for most organisations paying the bills, it should be a strategic issue. I've said there, are these necessarily mutually exclusive? I think they're linked and overlap. Nicholas talked about success in his book Project Management for Business and Engineering. The reference is down there on the right hand side. So he identified project goals and requirements such as time, cost, quality, performance, safety, etc. Those are kind of very straightforward. Also, he talked about in achieving project success, what you need is committed and involved project participants, good communication, information sharing and feedback. And Nicholas took a particularly systems perspective. And you can see that he identified a clear definition of scope, objectives and work to be done, planning of time, cost and performance goals, monitoring, control and preparation for implementation. Okay, and these we can think about as more than just the iron triangle, I think. So Atkinson back in 1999 came up with his square root model, which was a fairly innovative way of thinking about project success as more than something which is just the classic iron triangle. There's a reference to Atkinson at the end of this session. So he talked about the information system around the project and about achieving benefits for the sponsoring organisation and for the wider stakeholder community. Lim and Mohammed in the same year came up with a kind of macro-micro perspective, the micro delivery of the details of the project and the macro strategic perspective. Shenhar more recently has come up with something called the Diamond multi-dimensional project, which I've got a bit of an example of, which is this. And so for Shenhar and DeVere, the very short-term project efficiency is only a tiny part of what we mean by project success. In the short term, we have impact on consumers. In the medium term, it's about the business success of the organisation sponsoring the project. And over the longer term, it's about preparing the organisation for future challenges. Popper is a famous philosopher and scientist who talked about knowledge advancing not through success but through failure. and he looked at, or you can look at, in terms of a project perspective, you can look at failure in terms of failing to satisfy the obvious requirements of budget, schedule and performance, those sort of things, but also producing undesirable results, failing to meet the expectations of customers and end users, even leaving users worse off than before. And going back to Nicholas, he's got this little model: failure for the end user or customer on the left hand side, failure for the project organisation, contractors, suppliers in the right hand side. You can have either or both. The worst situation, and frequently I guess the reality for a lot of projects, is failure for the end user or customer. They're kind of not satisfied, and also the organisations delivering the project frequently aren't satisfied either. And worse still, you can have failure of the end item or end service. In the teaching session, I talked about a very good example of a disastrous project. It was a huge investment, but then what the government, this is Nimrod, and what the government did was take a long-term view of this project. Billions of pounds was invested in building these planes, which were then ultimately just scrapped, even though they've been completed. You can see there's one up in the corner there, which is actually flying, prototype. They end up getting scrapped because of the in-life cost that these aircraft would have entailed. You can see down here a quote from the then Defence Secretary Liam Fox, who said, "The idea that we ever allow ourselves to be in a position where something that was originally Nimrod 2000, where we ordered 21, was reduced to 9 and spent £3.8 billion, and we still weren't close to getting the capability, is not going to happen again." The question I might ask you is, will it happen again? My view is almost certainly it will happen again. It will happen again and again and again. And why is that? It's because we don't learn from our mistakes. Okay, going back to Nicholas again, this is a model which comes out of his book on project management. I said earlier he takes a systems approach, and what he's done here is he's arrayed the factors which he regards as being important to project success and a factor in project failure along the life cycle of the project. So what we have at the top, at the broad outside context of the project, is 1, inappropriate project management approaches. So not taking a project management approach will lead for Nicholas to project failure, and obviously the obvious that is having a good project management approach helps towards achieving success. 2, unsupported top management. Somebody somewhere is going to sponsor this project. Somebody somewhere needs to commit to it, to provide the resources which it needs, or to sign off for the resources it needs, and without having that top management support, the project's doomed to failure. Then within that, he's got Nicholas identified what he called the project management system. So these are the systematic aspects of the project which will lead to success or failure. So getting the right project manager is, for Nicholas, a crucial factor. Somebody who can lead, somebody who understands the managerial issues and aspects of project management delivery, not somebody who's just been identified by default, or who's convenient and available, or doesn't have a background or understanding of project management. A failure to use a systems approach, to see the project as a system, as a series of interconnected activities. Those activities all depend upon each other, are tightly coupled, are closely linked, and understanding that a failure in one part of the project will lead to failures for the overall project. Misuse of management techniques, so not understanding that techniques can be used or misused within projects. And then within the project itself, the planning control process, you can see there's the project life cycle, or a version of the project life cycle, and across this he's got a series of additional factors: poor communication right through the project, that can happen at any point in the project, non-involvement of the users. Again, users are the people who are going to be the beneficiaries of the project, and without their input or involvement somehow, they fail to draw value from the project. Inadequate planning at the early stages, inadequate definition, poor estimating, incorrect scheduling, numerous changes. Now, this is probably one of the biggest ones, I suspect, in most projects. Numerous changes to projects, particularly fixed price contracts. Inadequate control, so not really understanding where the project is and where it should be and how to keep it on track. Poorly planned termination. Okay, so a little bit about audits and reviews. We get the project to completion, and it's either been successful or a failure or whatever it happens to be. What can we do then? Do we just go away and say, right, that's it, fine, we're done? Or do we think about what's happened? Now, I found in my experience and in my research that project audits and reviews, what happened in the project, a kind of autopsy of the project, is frequently undervalued. So why is this? Partly, projects are regarded as one-offs. They're unique. It's one of the characteristics of projects. What can we possibly learn from a unique activity? Well, as I said at the beginning of this module, there's unique and unique. In some ways, projects are unique. They have aspects of them which make them unique, but at the same time, virtually all projects have something going on in them which is repeatable, something happening in them which you'll find in other projects. Okay, so projects are regarded as one-offs. The project team disperses. People go back to their host departments. Suppliers and consultants leave and go elsewhere. They're not getting paid anymore to be involved in the project. So what involvement, what interest would they have in having a review of what happened in the project? There's a project team transience. I talked about this a number of times in the module, that people come, deliver an activity or a series of activities, or are responsible for those activities, and then they leave. And so how do you ever find out what they did and what their reviews were on how the project went? And suppliers, I mean, how most projects have some sort of involvement of suppliers and consultants. What interest have they got in participating in a review or audit of the project? So these are some of the reasons why project reviews are frequently undervalued, and they're difficult to do. They're turning over mistakes and looking at mistakes. People don't want to do that. And then there are problems around how do we capture the knowledge, and then more crucially, if we capture the knowledge, how do we incorporate it into future projects? So evaluation, it's not just a progress report on the project's progress, but an overall review of all the aspects of the project. Why do we take this particular approach to delivering a project? What's the role of the project within the organisation's broader objectives? How well planned, designed, managed, controlled was the project? Those are really important questions. And what can we learn for the future? These sort of reviews, these sort of evaluations can happen both in process, so during the project delivery, and post-project. In process project evaluations mean that we can make changes to the project, to its direction, as well as if it's going awry in the project process. And also post-project ones, evaluations are broader in scope, allowing more intensive in detail. Okay, so to look at project evaluation, project learning, project reviews, I turned to some research in the teaching session which I've been involved in. This is actually quite an overlooked area in the literature, so I've tried to investigate this in some research I'm in the process of trying to get published at the moment. Here's a way of looking at projects. I used a concept called quality costing, so that time overruns, cost overruns, failures in delivery of project aspects can all be turned into a quality failure cost. So in this model you can see project 1, 2, 3, 4. The green part is the value adding activity, the red part is the failure cost due to overruns or project failure delivery. And the idea of this model is that if you are able to capture what went wrong, why it went wrong, understand the root causes, then you can transfer that learning to subsequent projects. You can measure the effect of that learning from project to project by measuring the quality failure costs on subsequent projects. And ideally, over a range of projects, that quality failure cost should be diminishing over time. So that was the basic premise of the research I was doing, and then I put together a methodology to try and capture that. So this is a paper I've got under review. A couple of papers on this subject I've got under review at the moment. Here we have the quality failure cost of quality data, which I captured from project to project, and you can see there's a series of buildings and road projects there in that model which I was looking at, and we had value adding activity in the green and in the red quality failure costs as a percentage of the overall project value. Then I looked at I used a Pareto 80-20 rule, so I looked at the 20% of failures that led to 80% of the, or 20% of the specific failures that led to 80% of the failure cost, and investigated those, and carried out root cause analysis on those sort of failures. Some were quite small, some were quite significant. So I carried out this root cause analysis and then tried to find ways of applying that knowledge of those root causes as opposed to the immediate apparent causes, so the root causes, to future projects. And the idea was to then apply to look for improvements in quality failure costs as a result of the knowledge which people could take from one project to the next. And so hopefully the idea is it becomes a virtuous circle. This is from the same piece of research. The root causes I found in projects, and what I found is this is happening in project after project after project, the same root causes were appearing. It was procurement of suppliers and consultants on the basis of lowest cost. This is a major issue. You have people employed on lowest cost, they have short-term supply relationships. They don't really care. They're just going to do their bit of work. They don't care about the system perspective of the project. They don't care about other aspects of the project. They care about their own little bit of work, which they do, go away, hopefully get paid for it and get a profit. And if you're procuring people on the basis of lowest cost, there's poor communication and coordination. They have no real interest in participating in the project as a member of the team. So they don't. So that's the first one. Second one was poor succession planning. This is a surprise to me, but people leave, key people within the project will leave, and there's no plan for capturing their knowledge or a handover to the next person. And this was actually the cause of a substantial amount of quality failures. So no succession planning for key members of the project team. Third one was poor understanding of business needs. What is the customer or client or end user, what is their need for the project? If you don't understand that, you don't really have a means of delivering value to those customers. And then we have poor communication between design and delivery. So the planning and design of the project and then its actual execution, the link between the two was often very poor. And in fact what I found was often we have a team doing the planning with a manager and a group of people planning and estimating and working out the design of the project. They will just go, and then we have a totally different team who take those plans and those ideas and then try to deliver it. And there's no communication between the two. There's no continuity. There's no real sense of connecting those two together. And so mistakes get made. So another bit of research which I presented at the Euroma conference a couple of years ago, in which I'm in the process of trying to get published at the moment, was around that last point, trying to link the design and planning of the project to its actual delivery. So here, key factors were capabilities and relationships between staff, understanding the client drivers, understanding what the customer really wanted from the project, understanding what's needed in the project. The involvement of key specialist suppliers. So we have all these specialist suppliers and consultants and contractors involved in most projects, nearly all projects actually, of a kind of any substance and any size. And these are frequently on a contract basis, as we saw in a previous session, and kept at arm's length for various reasons, mainly to ensure we get the lowest cost. The problem with this is that we're getting specialist suppliers involved, and actually what as a project team we need is their knowledge, is their abilities, their skills, their capabilities to be incorporated within the project, not just on an arm's length basis, but on an ongoing basis, and how that can be incorporated into the wider project. And so what I suggested in my research was a Pareto principle. You find that the 20% of suppliers and contractors who provide 80% of the value to the project, and those are the ones we need to focus on. There's a whole issue around team dynamics and leadership, which again I've covered in parts of the module. How is the project led? How is it managed? And how has the team got together, and to what extent can they work together? If there's not good leadership and there's not a strong team culture, the project's going to fail. And establishing and maintaining a sense of trust between the customer and client and the project team, and then between the project team and key suppliers and consultants. And actually what I found was there was no trust. Right across the project ecosystem, no trust whatsoever. No one trusted anyone. Everyone assumed everyone else was trying to rip them off or to swindle them. And in some ways that's borne out by research which I found in some of the research which one of my PhD students is doing. They found there's a real problem around if you take an agency theory perspective of this, there's a real problem around information asymmetry, and that leads to a failure of trust. And so somehow establishing trust between different parties involved in the project. One of the things I argue in my research is about developing project management skills as a dynamic capability for organisations. Organisations grow and develop through projects, maybe new product development, maybe new IT systems, maybe new buildings, maybe new facilities, whatever it happens to be, maybe organisational change. But that this, I argue, should become a dynamic capability for organisations. That it means that it provides a capability that sets them apart and provides them with a competitive edge over other organisations. Some of the difficulties around project learning: it can be difficult to communicate and capture these lessons because there's no time for reflection. Lessons, some of the things I pointed out, lessons may occur when the project's complete, but then the team gets disbanded. When I've been facilitating these sessions, these project review and learning sessions, they end up as blame sessions. Everyone blames everyone else. It's their fault. It wasn't me. It's not about blame, it's about understanding the project as a system, but it's very difficult to get across to people who are involved, not just involved professionally, but involved emotionally in the project delivery. I found insufficient mechanisms to feedback lessons. There's no learning culture within organisations. And retrospectives need independence, somebody outside. Now, I'm an academic, I can't do this on a regular basis. Organisations, I think, need to employ consultants who are trained to do this kind of thing and apply those lessons to future projects. So, some of the points which I picked up there: closing pound projects. seems straightforward, but it's not straightforward. With some projects, termination can sometimes become a project in itself. Success and failure is an entirely situated concept. It's about who you are and what you regard as success and failure from the project. Project audits and evaluation are important to projects, so we learn from success and failure, but are frequently not done, or if they are done poorly. Maybe you want to think about why that might be. And here's the last point. If projects really are unique endeavours, is it possible to learn from project outcomes? Some people say it isn't. I think personally it is. And then there's some references to some of the references I made in the session. And that's the end of the project management module. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, and you've got a real insight, hopefully an insight into some of the broader issues around projects. Thanks for your attention.